Jason is back as he takes the podium. He'll provide us with a future-ready D36 update. You can see on our continued progress. We are on track as to where we thought we would be at this point as far as the master facility planning process, future ready, a lot of continued community outreach. We had a meeting yesterday with the core team. You'll hear Jason's presentation. There's just two things I want to make sure at the end that we don't forget about. One is we do have 3 members interested in traveling to additional site visits out in different areas. We'll talk a little bit about that. So if there's any other board members interested, let us know. And then second, we'll talk a little bit more. It won't be part of Jason's presentation, but kind of revisiting the guiding principles. It was a process that we went through last year for the enrollment balancing to put some guidelines around where the priorities were from our community. And so I'm proposing that we just update that, we survey our community again. Because the nature of this, or the scope, I should say, of our challenge here of the initiative has widened a bit. So I'm recommending that we go back out and survey our community again to update those parameters. But we'll talk about that at the end. I just don't want to forget. So, okay, Jason.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It has indeed been an exciting time as a part of Future Ready D36. Tonight, I'm going to highlight for you some various things that have occurred as a part of Phase 2, a lot of summary infographics, at least a sample set of those, as well as a look ahead into Phases 3 and 4 as we get into the latter stages of this calendar year and into the early stages of next. And there'll be an opportunity at the end to have discussion, as was just mentioned. So we are indeed wrapping up Phase 2. We are having a nice feathering of some of the Phase 2 activities into Phase 3, and we'll have a similar expectation as we go from 3 to 4, that some of these things do overlap as new information becomes available to the core team or to others. We kind of go back and make sure that we've refined the information. So if you recall from one of my earlier presentations, we have a very linear structure to our path forward, but we might find ourselves with some flow, if you will, to the left or to the right of that, and so we're seeing that as anticipated. So here you are, you can see where we are in the overall timeline. We're here, of course, on the 14th at the board update. Several activities listed from our Phase 2 endeavor. You'll see, as was mentioned earlier during public comment, sustainability and environmental stewardship during our values workshop session. Old Ideas, which was a number of stakeholder groups, including community members from the end of Phase 1. Opportunities and challenges, both in the current and future context. We had a day in the life of a learner, Phase 1, which included both classroom observation as well as student activity logging from teachers in every building. So you'll see some continuity there for our part 2 of that tonight. Success Headlines, which was an activity that we undertook both at Global Perspectives. Hopefully some of you had a chance to attend those sessions, as well as the WEC, and then the local building tours. We have a brief video to share some photography that occurred from those local tours. So I thought I'd offer some of my own observations as the Phase 2 data comes to bear. So you can see some listed on screen here. So there's been a strong commitment to Progressive Ed 2.0 and understanding what that is. There's still some opportunity to put some more qualifications to that definition as we move forward, and that will be increasingly important in this process. You can see some increased areas of student agency or ownership and mindfulness, collaboration between and amongst students, teachers, and community, a desired increase in inquiry-based and project-based learning, community-based learning, outdoor learning opportunities, prioritization towards environmental stewardship, as well as indoor environmental quality. So from our values workshop, a few highlighted priorities from that group. You can see for your student teachers there, indoor environmental quality was top on the list, student-centric design, connectivity to the outdoors, and nutrition. For your administration and operations, sustainable operations, of course, data transparency, so we spoke about the opportunity to both survey, meter, and sensor, all 3 avenues to measure success in this regard. So the workshop team looked at different prioritization for each one of these metrics and how we might prove in fact that we're meeting them. renewable energy, of course. For your community, energy management, of course, waste management and carbon emissions were top priorities. From your community, we heard several ideas from phase 1 and indeed phase 2. So you can see in this graphic on the right-hand side of the wheel, you have each one of the school campuses with the corresponding color, and then a line that connects that campus to an idea. So as an example, Carlton Washburn, sort of at 1 o'clock, if you will, on the diagram with the dark green lines extending across. It's worth noting that the diagrams also exist by campus alone, so you wouldn't have to trace all of the colored lines across. You could see each individual campus and how those ideas indeed connected. So you can see a lot of overlap indeed between the campuses amongst some of the ideas and common threads. HVAC, environmental quality, those kinds of things are all common. I mentioned opportunities and challenges. This is a simple 2x2 grid that we put to several workshop settings, including curriculum and instruction. And we looked for, quite simply, in this quadrant, the largest opportunities that exist in the future, the opportunities of the past, the challenges of the past, and indeed the challenges that might lie ahead. And we've categorized those in a series of themes and then color-coded them. So each one of the dots is specific to its location, so essentially an order of magnitude, and then those have been aggregated to a mean or central location within the quadrant. So we received 33 comments regarding progressive education as a future opportunity, and so you'll see that that's the aggregate of those. Also following a summary graphic like this is the individual comments under each category. Day in the Life of a Learner, Part 2. So we have charted 2027 as our 10-year look ahead for the master plan. We were hoping to correlate how you teach today to how you might teach in the future. So we broke that into two different stakeholder groups, the K4 stakeholder group and the 5-8 stakeholder group. So the graphic that you see on screen is indicative of the responses we heard through the K4 subset of stakeholders. I won't go into too much detail on this, but I would like to highlight a few things about the graphic. So on the left-hand side of any one of the areas, you will note an average, as we observed for the Day in the Life Part 1, how your schools were utilizing any one of these modalities as an example. So you'll see for your 2017 observed week for K4, you had 15% small group work. The range for 2027 was 10 to 35%. So you can see how you're within the range already of where you might be in the future. But it's also worth noting that at any week during your school calendar year, these numbers would vary by the activities, the happenings within the curriculum, and the grade level. So it's not to capture everything that would happen, but indeed it's just to chart a pathway forward. So you can see how that lays out respectively for some of the modalities and experiences on screen. Likewise, for our 5 through 8 learners, you can see how that goes as well. So a heavy influence or interest in project-based learning at this level, as well as at the K4 level. I'll note one major other difference between K4 and 5-8 was during the 5-8 sessions, we heard a greater opportunity for virtual learning experiences in addition to physical learning experiences, where we did not see that same response in the K4 data set. We talked a lot about success and what that might look like in the future and how you might measure it for different groups. So representative sample of students here for 2027. You can see in this word cloud, the scale of the word is reflective of its prominence in the comments. So you can see inquiry here being the top response. For staff and community, you can see some similar ideas. We talked earlier about increased collaboration amongst and between your students, teachers, and community members. That was reflected in this exercise as well. We also had done headlines with multiple groups, including community members, so we have a representative sample here as well. Now, all of the colors throughout are keyed to the same categories as we saw in the earlier opportunities and challenges. So if you see a green here, it correlates to the same green throughout, such we can create threads throughout the data. This is similar to the Wordle or the word cloud, whereby the scale of the font is indicative of its prominence. But the headlines read in sentences such that this top one says the Winnetka experience reaches students throughout the world is that top sentence, how you would read that from left to right. So we didn't want to lose the context of the entire headline, but wanted to theme them accordingly. Another activity we see was an opportunity to put ourselves into a future mindset and capture what folks might see on a tour of your facilities in 2027. So I've just highlighted two categories here specifically pertaining to spaces, facilities, and site. So you can see 39 such comments under space-specific needs for progressive education and 18 for facilities and sites otherwise. This is an excellent transition to our tours. The next click will be a video that was put together by the district representing the video, or rather the tour stops that were made recently. So I'll talk over some of the photographs as they play through, but I'd invite anyone else who participated in the tour to perhaps share some insight as the video plays over the next 2 minutes. This first is Sunset Ridge, not too far down the road. For any of you who have had a chance to visit through your own community activities, friends and neighbors, it is quite a school. They had several thoughtful measures implemented in the school, everything from public spaces to private spaces to how collaboration layered at multiple levels. Environmental stewardship was also on the forefront of their considerations. History through that historical classroom that just flashed on screen. What's up now is the addition that has occurred at New Trier High School. We had a chance to tour that as well. You can see the central core space, some green roof space, science labs, maker spaces, career and tech ed programs, a lot of common spaces available for students and teachers alike. Iroquois Community School, an opportunity to see flexible learning. This was, I believe, a renovation.
Yes, it was a renovation. Yes, on the outside, it looks like kind of a dated 1960s building. When you went inside, it was completely different.
Westmore. Lane Tech in the city. A lot of focus on hydroponics and plants in their science program.
Actually their aquaculture lab. They have a living wall. They have a system that feeds actually fish tanks where they raise tilapia and fertilize all the plants. And it's all student run. We have an extensive maker lab and robotics program there as well as a very large music space for music production, art and design lab.
Intrinsic schools. This was a new build.
Well, it was a log, wasn't it a log factory, or
Right.
they kind of had, they had to
That's
keep
true.
some,
Lumberyards,
they had to keep,
Stand
the
corrected.
ceilings were so high.
North Shore Country Day School. So a lot of wonderful visits have occurred. Now each one of these visits is accompanied by an exit survey for each one of the folks who have an opportunity to tour with us, such that we can gather relevant information. So I'll just talk briefly about some of the trends that we've seen that align very closely to the stakeholder feedback received in phase 2. So a lot of focus on flexibility, a lot of focus on environmental stewardship. I mentioned Sunset Ridge as one such example. Flexible furniture, community use of spaces, collaboration, all very common threads throughout the facilities that have been toured thus far. Let's talk a little bit about what's next. So there's as much excitement ahead as lies just behind us. You'll see in phase 3 that this is really our opportunity, our first opportunity to start quantifying space. We've been capturing ideas, and now we're going to put those to task, if you will, and start to hypothesize what various solutions might look like spatially. So first, this will occur through a tabular listing of the ideas and how they might be implemented. But we'll be also balancing that with the 5 things that you see on screen here. So enrollment forecast information and the information from the enrollment balancing process, attendance boundaries, grade level structures, any future courses, programs that might be offered, and of course the schedule. I've spoken about this a few different times through my updates, the importance of time and utilization in your facilities and how they might be sized to appropriately support those things is a very large component of any quantification of space. So these things will be happening throughout December and into January as we transition out of the holidays and into the new year. Beyond that, I wanted to highlight a few things for the core team. The core team, as was mentioned, met yesterday. We're intending to meet again in December for some virtual tours of spaces around the country, an opportunity perhaps to talk by video conference with some educators. January 10th is our first time back together physically in the new year. And then we intend to have bi-weekly meetings moving forward then after. Now there might be some additional special meetings that would happen outside of that cadence. We formed yesterday an impromptu research subcommittee of the core team such that we could help gather more information about any one of the topics at hand, including what I just mentioned in phase 3 when we're talking about quantification or boundaries or enrollment information or grade level structures, those kinds of things. All that information to come to bear in early 18. So we'll be meeting more frequently. We'll likely be meeting for longer durations as well as the process moves forward such that we can meet our timeline. I also wanted to talk about some meetings and events. Community engagement, of course, is a cornerstone of the process. And so as we look ahead to spring, the core team, as I mentioned, will be meeting regularly to prepare materials for the community to review. I've put some tentative windows of time here on screen. I would anticipate that sort of a phase 5 rollout, if you will, a first opportunity to see some diagramming and some listing of ideas would be in early March. I've most often encountered this as a special board meeting / community event. We can talk more about the ideas behind this event as we get closer to it, but it would be a few hours in duration focused on much of the why behind the planning and start to outline what those steps might be for community input moving forward. So beyond that date, we'd be looking at a potential joint core team board meeting, a panel discussion in March to talk about the things that we're hearing from the community about the ideas, and then making community presentations similar to how we did in phase 1 at each one of the school campuses in March and April, such that we could get individual and specific feedback from each one of those groups as well. And then the core team would continue to meet again with great frequency in April to work on refinements of that before going out into the next round of iterations. So that's kind of what we'll expect to occur here in spring as a little bit of a look ahead for the board.
So as I realize I'm stating the obvious here, but come early March, which is, put the holidays into this. This is not that far away. So it's important. That's when this, the concepts will come out. There'll be even greater interest in the community at that time. It's where it's going to become personal for people. So I just want to make sure then that between now and March, this board has the information and that you need and felt like you've been brought along the way. And I know, Jennifer, you're obviously most intimately involved in this, being on the core team. But come early March, we're going to have to start revising some of the ideas we have. A lot of community engagement is part of the process. So we have a couple of months here. So as things, we have same thing in the core team is we start to roll this out, the core team is going to be diving into the enrollment data, some of the demographics, looking at some of the boundaries, looking at grade configurations, all those hot points, and trying to filter through those to make sure that what survives is basically something that's going to be feasible, but just to be very obvious here with the board as far as what's ahead.
And we talked about, yesterday, doing more surveys, right? To get more of a tap into the community and the ideas, and bring that back in, like to start collecting more data points going forward with SurveyMonkey. Should we talk about that?
Yeah, SurveyMonkey
So we can
is
just
an
keep
excellent
collecting
tool.
information and then start streamlining it.
For sure, and part of the information sharing is indeed some of the summary graphics from what's happened in phase 2, and making sure that the community can ask the relevant questions and provide answers to the relevant questions of the board. So I would look to start crafting those survey tools and putting them out to the community in January would be my suggested timeline for that activity, such that when the core team comes back together and starts meeting with greater frequency, that we'd be able to monitor and refine that data and even additionally put out additional surveys if necessary.
I just have a question. So for Barrington, that's farther along in this process than obviously we are right now, did the wants, needs, what was cited as important to the community, to, let's just say all the stakeholders, the teachers, administrators, the community members, did that change from when you did the preliminary meetings? So I guess what I'm asking is, was there a shift in the wants and needs in the Barrington community from what they did in those first global perspective, write a headline, tell me what you see in the newspaper about District 36, to when you moved it down the pipeline and you were actually formatting specific lists or specific visions?
That's a great question. In general, I say no. That the themes that we hear earlier in the process normally continue into the latter stages of the process as well. That was the case in Barrington. Now there may be a few finer points of detail that come up as the process unfolds in the latter stages to say, oh, we should really address this. But by and large, we see consistency throughout the comments.
I'm assuming some people have not been as engaged to this point as they will be when they start seeing alternatives and other things out there. In your experience of other projects that you've done in other towns, do we have about what you would expect participating now and ideas being ranged? I mean, is there anything that you see that we need a heads up on in terms of participation, quality of, or volume of?
Participation as far as quality has been excellent. As far as quantity, it would be difficult for me to say that we couldn't benefit from more. We could always benefit from more participation in everything that we do throughout the process. As is my experience, participation, at least from the community level, normally increases with each phase, such that when the ideas come out, more people come out. When the costs come out, the most people come out. And then when we get to the latter stages of 5 and into early 6, you see a lot of interest, intense interest from the community. It's important throughout the process that we're very open, honest, and transparent about what we are hearing, such that for folks who don't have the opportunity to participate or didn't have a chance to participate in earlier phases can get all of the data that they need to make informed decisions. So the catalog of information being built needs to be available by the time that they have a chance to really dive in.
And right, that's a primary source of our web page that's dedicated to this. So just like we did for remote balancing, every meeting, core team or community outreach or anything has been in a timely fashion posted to that website and included, I think, every week in the newsletter to our families, but we've also put in village newsletters as well.
Are we seeing people using that information? I mean, hitting those links? Or is it not yet? And when we get to March, suddenly we'll see a big spike?
Correct.
Okay.
One thing I want to highlight, after I've met with several of the village trustees at this point talking about the TIF district, I think that we have to really be, as a board, really aware of what this village, the pressures it's under. And so we have to, I think, we have to be aware that we've got to not make these decisions in a vacuum. That we've got the stormwater issue, we've got the downtown issue that they want to look at the TIF for, and then we've got our schools. And so there's 3 pockets, if you want to look at that, it's for investment that this community is really going to have to weigh over time and be really aware of. And so as we think about this project, you have to keep it in the greater context of what the other demands are going to be on the village residents. So that's becoming more and more apparent to me as I talk to the trustees about it. So just to keep that in mind when we're thinking about this whole thing.
That's the conclusion of my presentation tonight.
Okay, we have, I think, a couple things, site visits and then guiding principles. Do you want to talk about site visits at all?
Sure. So we have an opportunity to visit exemplary schools coming up at the end of the month. We are in process of coordinating the exact cadence of each trip, and the schools that we have identified have all been contacted and affirmed that they're happy to accept a tour group at each. So we have those lined up. So we're going to visit 3 different zones. We're going to visit the upper Midwest and build a trip around Minneapolis. We're going to visit Virginia and see some wonderful examples of progressive education and new facilities in and around the Charlottesville area. So that's something to be excited about. And then some examples in California, in the West Coast, with, again, some very progressive models of education and how they're being implemented in both renovated and new facilities. So those will occur the week of the 27th. And so look for the final data to be shared very soon. I did receive one contact from a superintendent today, changing the schedule a little bit for the East Coast trips. So I'm working through each one of the schools now again to make sure that they could meet a revised timetable. So Barry, I don't know if you have more information that you'd like to share.
No, I think it's pretty exciting, nice variety of different schools. Some of the schools that we're looking at, for instance, the high-tech schools in San Diego, which are definitely leaders, some outstanding schools in Minnesota you mentioned, and we're also looking at a variety of schools, so not just looking at K schools or middle schools. We're looking at, along the visit will be also some high schools will actually stretch our thinking and college and university, so a nice variety of schools. Obviously with a focus on K-8, but also looking at some other things.
So they're all happening in the same week? I can't remember.
Yes, they are happening in the same week, the week after Thanksgiving.
They're small teams. No, so if there are board members interested in that, let us know. We've got core team members. Dave Candy's been working with some students who've been very interested in taking leadership in this process as well, who are interested in traveling with their parents. The facility subcommittee talked a lot about this, wanting to make sure that ultimately, I don't want to speak for the subcommittee, but had strong financial parameters around this, efficiencies around this, but also wanting to make sure that we don't cut ourselves short to find the best models for some of the themes that have been emerging of interest to our community, and making sure we have a good cross-section of community members, students, administrators, board members. I know Jennifer, Nat, and Kristen so far have shared interest and I know investing in from their own personal their own personal bank accounts to support this. So this is not all being funded by the district. I want to be clear about that. Some of this is being funded privately. But we want to make sure that we have access to these environments to come back, and then also earlier, if you caught, have virtual access points in addition. So it's not just all these site visits, but there's a lot of conversation about how important it is to actually go to the environment, interact with the students in the environment, the staff, get some video footage, diary footage, so to speak, of this, and be able to bring it back and have the various constituent groups talk about this. So that's ultimately where we've landed, and something talking to Barrington too, they felt was very beneficial.
And I'm excited particularly that the students might be available to take these journeys, obviously with such a student-centric focus in the district and progressive education. sharing the experience of traveling and seeing other applications can be illuminating for the adults in the process to how these spaces might be utilized. So I'm excited about their participation.
And we're not going to Norway?
No, I know, or Finland, some of our students do it.
Principal Swanner actually just gave me a Finland pitch as I was walking through the hall.
Okay.
So,
You can pay for that one.
I'll pay. You want to go with me?
Finland in
Not
December.
in the winter.
Yeah.
I was gonna say January.
So, anything else about site visits? So we'll come back. The other thing is we will come back and debrief that and have public opportunities for the site visitors to our community members to hear directly from our site visitors. So shifting then, just one more point is I want to come back to, I linked in your board packet the guiding principles that we used that were the priorities that were identified by our community last year that helped serve as to assist us in decision making for enrollment balancing and to inform the recommendation to the board. I do recommend, as I said earlier, that we go out to our community again. The scope of this project has changed, and we do want to make sure that there is greater awareness of in our community, especially in our parent community. They want to make sure that we have updated those priorities. So, is the board comfortable with moving forward, or?
Yes, I guess I am, but I have to tell you, I found those guiding principles in phase one to be restrictive and not particularly, I mean, by the end, they didn't really work for what we were trying to do. And it was very frustrating to constantly being pulled back to those when they really weren't applicable anymore. So I'm reluctant to put too much emphasis on the guiding principles as the process is still evolving. That's not to say we shouldn't have them, but I think as the process moves forward, your focus shifts a little bit. Perhaps the guiding principles that you have, you were looking at it from a one perspective change, and are maybe not on point or relevant anymore. So I don't know how anybody else felt about that. Kristen, you were on there. What did you think about the guiding principles?
Like I can remember back then.
I know. I don't
I
know.
tried to put that out of my mind.
What is the reason for having the guiding principles, I guess?
So this was something as the core team tries to, obviously they have a lot of information about the interest right now. You've seen summaries every board meeting of some of the feedback about our current state of the district and what we'd like to see. And then we have a lot of data and information on demographics and forecasting and we have mapping tools and all of that. So when you put those pieces together, if everything's a priority, or if everything has equal weight and merit, when you look at that about grade configuration versus changing boundaries versus construction, it gives you some idea as to where the community is as far as priority and as far as support. And so it doesn't mean you're not bound to them as policies, you're not bound to this as your boundary in discussion. And as you saw, part of it was you realized we need to open, part of the frustration I think you had is because through the process we realized that the enrollment balancing in and of itself in isolation was not going to solve the bigger problem, but bigger issues at play.
I guess I would just encourage you as you do this, maybe to set priorities for sort of subjects that are priorities to the community as opposed to statements about, I think as I recall, our guiding principles were statements about what we believed about the priorities. And I think I would, maybe I agree with you, having a sort of sense of this is most important, this is second most important. I haven't had any issue with that. I would be careful not to bind yourself too much to a particular statement that then people are going to point to when in fact, well, you've kind of moved beyond that to a whole different set of issues at this point. I don't know.
You're saying to broaden the concepts. Well, we can
Just broaden. I mean, I just make them more broad concepts as opposed to specific concepts.
Do you remember what they were?
My thought.
Yeah, we
I
linked
don't.
the priorities in there. Some of them were, based decision on the least costly option was one. Ensure the elementary schools have equitable enrollments and building utilization over the next 5 years. Minimize the number of students impacted by any adjustment to school attendance boundaries. So those are some of the examples. We can work this out.
Because things like, remember, like the student one became minimize the number of students, but when it really came down to it, it wasn't just about the number of students, but who the students were, fourth graders versus kindergartners versus, and it kind of became a.
There's no way you can ask the right question exactly at this stage.
That's my fear.
But I think you need to have some sense of the things that you think are important going in. The weighting of them is going to be the devil.
Fair enough. I don't think it's a bad idea. I just, yeah, think about them as you draft and maybe being a little more general than specific might be good.
What we can do is just draft a new version of what we go out to the community with and run it by the next board meeting. I don't think there's timing where we have to get this out in December. We can probably wait till January on this. Yeah.
Well, your current core members will be more helpful to you really than I would be, just from feedback from last time.
Fairly green light on that, though? Okay. All right, anything else?
I will say, I've heard, I was part of a listening session for teachers, and they complimented DLR on doing a very, they said there are a lot of things that are out there are a lot of changes being proposed, but you guys are handling it really well and asking them, but not overwhelming them with too many. They said it was a nice balance, so I just want to pass that back. I think it's, I've heard that from parents as well, but it was nice to hear it specifically raised by teachers.
Appreciate that.
All right, thank you.
Quick question before you break.
Sure.
Of the facilities that folks are seeing, or have seen, or will see, how many of those are DLR facilities?
Small percentage. The local facilities, I don't think any of them, other than our office space, which we used as a stopover in Chicago, were a DLR group facility. When we go to Minneapolis, there will be one of the tour stops. When we go to Virginia, there will be members of DLR group who have designed schools in their former lives for other companies that will be a part of the tour, but no specific DLR schools. And then California, I believe that there are, High Tech High was certainly not, and so no. So a handful, three or so.
And we requested part of that too, so make sure we get a nice array.
When are you guys gonna decide, because if I'm doing this the week after Thanksgiving, I want to know
Tomorrow.
which direction I'm headed and when might I be going?
I appreciate that, and your patience is wonderful. You know, every day I get a curveball from a superintendent about this date or that date. So we're working diligently to refine those dates every day. And as Tricia said, every day I say we're going to get it done today. So it's my goal certainly to have it done as soon as possible. Tomorrow would be wonderful.
I also want to recognize your partner in this too, partnership, Maureen and Miller and Barry Rogers. Thank you for helping with a lot of the investigation and research on this too, and working with DLR. So it's been nice to make sure we have that district perspective and on this decision making. Thank you.
Thank you all.